There are mass evacuations ahead of Hurricane Milton at this very moment in Florida. And that's topping the hill on NewsNation tonight. Hello, good evening. I'm Blake Berman, and would you look at what is heading Florida's way this evening? A major hurricane that continues to strengthen. In just the past hour, Milton climbing back to a Category 5. It could be the worst hurricane that Tampa has seen in a century. That city's mayor telling her residents, if they don't listen to evacuation orders, then, quote, you are going to die. Now, there are mandatory evacuations at this hour for all or parts of 11 counties, spanning roughly 300 miles, this whole stretch here in Florida, plus 2 more counties in northeast Florida. Milton expected to make landfall in roughly 24 hours, and tonight, here is part of the scene. This is Collier County, southwestern part of Florida. You can see folks are trying to get out of town, and that is exactly what Florida's governor is saying needs to happen right now.
You should be executing your plan now. If you're going to get out now. You have time today. Time will be running out.
We will take you across the state of Florida throughout the hour. Our Brian Enton is just outside of Tampa in Gulfport, Florida. But we begin tonight with our Alex Capriello, who is in Sarasota this evening. Alex?
Yeah, hey there, Blake. What we are seeing right now are mandatory evacuations through many parts of this coastal western Florida. A lot of people here in Sarasota have already gotten up and left. Parts of downtown seem like ghost towns. What does remain, boarded up windows, sandbags that line the perimeter of the buildings, but a few stragglers that are still standing left behind. They're going to try to ride out this storm. Storm surge seems to be the biggest threat, and you can see why. From Helene, you could see one of those boats that have been shipwrecked right there along the coast. Most certainly, if they are getting the storm surge that they're predicting, boats like that will be lifted from the water and pushed towards those condos. Many of the people I spoke to that are planning on sticking it out live in those condos right there. They want to see the storm race in, and they believe that they're going to be safe. As for other parts of this area, the barrier islands are going to be shut down beginning in 1 hour from now. Those are most certainly mandatory evacuation zones. That's going to be completely flooded in a little bit more than 24 hours. Let's head 35 miles north to Gulfport. That's where we find senior national correspondent Brian Enton. Brian?
Hey, Alex. Yeah, it's a mess up here. They are still recovering from Hurricane Helene just a couple of weeks ago. And everywhere you go, this is what you see up and down the streets. There is just debris everywhere, block after block. This entire area was underwater because of Helene. So people had to take all the stuff out of their homes that was destroyed, refrigerators, cabinets, drywall, clothes, everything you can think of. They've stacked it all up out here along the street. Well, now guess what? There's another hurricane coming, and the big concern is it's going to flood here again, probably up to where my chest is. The winds are going to be above 100 miles per hour. All of this stuff is going to fly around, and it is just going to be a real nightmare for the people who live here outside of Tampa. You just think of all the work they did, all the cleanup over the last week and a half, and imagine what this place is going to look like come tomorrow night. Blake?
Hey, Brian, real quick, where you are, as we started and saw the traffic shot at the top of the show. Folks leaving?
Yes, that is for sure. I mean, and this is an area where it's kind of like, you know, the old Florida types, Blake. This is one of those areas where people kind of try to normally ride it out. That is not the case this time. Basically, right. People went through Helene. The entire area was underwater, and they're just like, we don't want to do it again. Not to mention, I mean, a lot of their stuff is out on the street. It was destroyed the first time. Yeah. So Alligator Alley was just, I mean, it was slammed going towards Miami and Fort Lauderdale, people getting out of here.
Brian Enton, Alex Capriello live in Southwest Florida tonight, both of you. Stay safe. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you. All right, so right now, Hurricane Milton, less than 500 miles southwest of Tampa. You can see sustained winds, 165 miles an hour. The pressure right now at 905 millibars. That is low. And that is dangerous. Let me show you part of the path here and what we're expecting to see in the upcoming days here in Florida. So this is the cone right now. This is Hernando County up here. This is Collier County, Lee County down here. You've got 8 different counties right now that are under a mandatory evacuation just within this cone here. You can see some major cities: St. Pete, Tampa, Sarasota, again, Fort Myers down here. The storm will cross Orlando and then exit somewhere between Daytona Beach and Jupiter. Here's part of the other story, which will be storm surge in this area. You can see 10 to 15 feet where it's expected to make landfall, and even when you go in outer areas, up to 12 feet in the Cape Corals, Fort Myers area, 5 to 10 feet up here as well. And then there's going to be flooding throughout, right? We saw this in Helene. This always happens, and this is the projection. This is what the possibilities are. A high probability of flooding. You can see this will cross all across the midsection of Florida, the I-4 corridor here, and you see this pinkish area. This is basically the area where you are going to see widespread power outages as well. We saw this in Helene, right? There were these pockets of orange as it related to flooding. It started really in the south and then made its way up to Asheville. And the story in Florida tonight and in the upcoming days here is once this storm makes landfall somewhere here, this is Tampa, Sarasota. Down here, this is Fort Myers, Cape Coral. It's going to move east. It's going to knock out power, and it is going to exit through that side of the state. Joining us now is Willie Nunn. He is a regional administrator for FEMA. He is at Florida's Operations Center in Tallahassee, and Willie joins us live this evening. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill, sir. I know you've been doing this for about 20 years, and I wonder what you think makes this storm different.
Thanks for having me. This storm different. It's back-to-back storms, but we are lockstep with our federal partners and with the state and being prepared for this. It's different with its intensity, with the expected potential impacts across the West Coast and through Florida, but we're prepared. We're staged assets as we normally do, and we're ready to go.
I hear you that you're prepared and that you're ready to go, but there's already stories of fuel shortages. Is this just the beginning?
The fuel shortages, we've looked ahead to make sure we have commodities and resources, fuel resources in place to do that. And also to be ready for any other requests the state may have. And so we'll put things at our staging area in Eglin Air Force Base and in Whiting Field to make sure that if they're asked for, we can respond to, and also look at our other federal partners to help us do that as well.
You know, there's been questions, Willie, about funding as it relates to FEMA. We heard a couple different stories from the administration this week. Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary, said, we don't have the funding to make it through the season, and then FEMA seemingly walked that back. Where are you right now with Helene having ripped through the southeast and Milton tonight on Florida's doorstep?
Sir, with the continuing resolution funded FEMA for FY25 from 1 October, we have the funding in place, we have the resources in place, and we're ready to go.
Willie, you know, when you talk about Florida, one of the big issues there is insurance and the cost of insurance. In North Carolina, we saw this, a mountain town that is now completely wiped away, or parts of it. And a lot of folks don't have flood insurance there, or in Florida, it's just too expensive to get. What should be the role of FEMA? Because unquestionably, lives will be devastated and lives will be changed.
The role of FEMA initially, sir, is to make sure we get the message out in partner, lockstep with the state. The thing right now is to listen to those local folks. If they tell you to evacuate, please follow those rules. We want to make sure, though, that people know that we'll be there to work with them along with the state in the aftermath, whether they have National Flood Insurance Program or other insurance. We're looking at all the programs that we have to offer that we can bring to bear in this as well.
All right, Willie Nunn with FEMA. He normally works the Northwest, but in Florida this evening tonight as FEMA is pushing assets there. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Appreciate it. Meantime, President Biden and the Florida, President Biden and the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis are coordinating ahead of Hurricane Milton. The White House, for example, releasing this picture last night of the two on the phone. And today, the president praised Florida's governor.
I talked to him again yesterday, and I said, I said, no, you're doing a great job. It's all being done well. We thank you for it.
All right, so that was today, but yesterday the vice president, Kamala Harris, trashed the sitting governor, saying he is playing quote-unquote political games by not answering her calls. DeSantis says the VP had never called for any storm up until now, and that he deals directly with the president. And in Asheville, North Carolina, by the way, today, the congressman there, Republican Chuck Edwards, released his own fact check. He says while FEMA does have a non-disaster related presence at the border, response money has not been diverted. He also described the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas' recent comments that FEMA is running out of money, as you heard there, as politicizing a tragedy. Joining me now here on the Hill, Kelly Meyer, NewsNation Washington correspondent, Julia Manchester, national political reporter for the Hill, and Joe Khalil, NewsNation Washington correspondent as well. Hello to you all. Nice to have you in. Obviously, our eyes, attention, focus on what's going on in Florida. Folks trying to get out. It's going to be devastating there in the upcoming few days. Back here in Washington and out on the campaign trail, there's another story that is playing out. Kamala Harris, there's been a lot of discussion recently about what Donald Trump has said and what Republicans have said and misinformation and disinformation. Joe, Kamala Harris is releasing attack ads against Donald Trump right now, and to the point where, she went after Ron DeSantis in Florida, and President Biden says, they talk, everything's cool.
Yeah. There's enough of this to go around here. It's fair to say that both sides, both campaigns, have injected politics into disaster relief. The ad you're talking about, Kamala Harris campaign, just released it today. It criticizes Donald Trump for his handling of wildfires in California when he was president, saying that essentially he was considering withholding aid because it was a blue state. Now, we don't know if that allegation is true, but when you step back, what you've got is politicizing a natural disaster, which is exactly what the Harris campaign and surrogates have been criticizing Donald Trump for. Now, we have also debunked that myth. We keep hearing over and over that migrants are the reason that victims of flood and hurricane are not going to get resources. If you want to criticize that, it's within your right to criticize it. But it's undeniable now that the Harris campaign also is putting money behind this and doing virtually what they're criticizing.
The dynamics here are fascinating because you got Joe Biden, the sitting Democratic president, Ron DeSantis, a presidential hopeful, the Republican governor, and you say the relationship between them is all good.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, Ron DeSantis and Joe Biden are the ones who are taking the lead on this, from the federal government response and the state of Florida's government response. Look, there's obviously political tension between the two. They're from two opposite sides of the aisle. Ron DeSantis was running for president at one point, would bash Joe Biden, but their history of responding to disasters. I remember the Surfside building collapse in South Florida in 2021. We saw the two of them really come together in that moment. So they both have really risen to the occasion, not only during Helene or the building collapse, but also this week.
In North Carolina, the devastation is still there, Kelly. Lots of questions about the response there. Chuck Edwards, the Republican congressman who represents that area, came out today and said, look, there is money for immigration in FEMA, but it's not being diverted to the border. He also went after Alejandro Mayorkas for saying, look, you're politicizing this by saying, we don't have the money.
Right, and it's interesting coming from a Republican congressman who's saying essentially what the Democrats are saying, what the Biden administration is saying, is that these are myths. He actually, and I have it on my phone, he brought up from his tweet, you could go to his website and it says debunking Helene response myths. And at the top, number one, he says nobody can control the weather is how he starts it out. And this is someone that's in Western North Carolina. That's an area that's been likely, or we see, the most hard hit by this storm. So it's interesting to see him come out to try to say to his fellow Republican colleagues, hey, here's what's true, here's what's not true.
You have here in October two tragedies, one that's happened, one that's about to happen. And you see both of the presidential candidates here in the middle of it, 28 days to go down the home stretch. Joe, Julia, Kelly, thank you. See you both later in the show. Still to come here on the Hill, we continue our coverage of Hurricane Milton as it closes in on Florida.
Really, almost every place on the west coast of Florida could get major storm surge.
Thousands evacuating right now along the coast just weeks after Helene flooded that area. Live look right side of your screen. You could see part of the struggle for Florida this evening as they try to get out of that state. Our coverage continues here on the Hill on NewsNation. Plus, as North Carolina, as I mentioned, continues to struggle, we'll share what we're learning from a top election official in that state. How do you conduct an election if the town is basically destroyed? That's on the other side. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. Right side of your screen, live look at the situation across Florida as residents continue to evacuate this evening, hoping to experience something much different than the horrors that are continuing to play out in Asheville, North Carolina. Look at the local newspaper there. This is the Citizen Times in Western North Carolina. They are reporting tonight how, quote, everything is destroyed. And, for example, how veterans are having trouble accessing services and care. Now, with North Carolina being a key swing state, there is also a political impact in the aftermath. Scott Tranter is the data science director at Decision Desk HQ. Hello, Scott. You were on a call with the Secretary of State in North Carolina just the other day. You were telling me a little bit about it. I want to show you the counties that were impacted here as it relates to Hurricane Helene, and of course they're trying to get back up on their feet. These are basically the areas in western North Carolina. What did you learn on that call?
We learned that out of those 13 counties, not a single county has a fully operational county Secretary of State, county elections board. So they don't have operating to process absentee ballots, send them out, cure them, all those different things. And then early vote starts next week. So
if they don't have the ability to do that, you can't just turn the light switch on, right, and get it. How quickly can that come back up?
That is the question. I was just looking at the pictures you had up on there. It's going to take a little while because they have to get electricity. They've got to get these buildings back in order. And these workers have to, they're worried about their homes. They got to get back in. I think it's going to take a couple weeks. Secretary of State says they're going to be ready by Election Day, but, it's starting.
All right, so we're looking at that area. This is, again, western North Carolina. The red is obviously Republican-leaning counties. The blue, Asheville, you see in the middle there, Democratic-leaning areas. This map basically went 54-44 for Donald Trump in 2020. And with the situation there now, obviously, again, the only thing they care about is food, water, power, getting back on, finding neighbors, so on and so forth. But on the politics of this, with 3 weeks to go, this is the situation there in western North Carolina.
Yeah, look, North Carolina, in our own forecast with you guys, look, it's a 60% chance Donald Trump wins. It's gone back down a little bit. He looks a bit higher this summer. He's going to have to get 54% in this area for him to overcome what Western Carolina is. And that's why we're going to be looking at the absentee voting, the early voting, whether or not this delay we're talking about is going to have any impact on the turnout.
All right, so I mentioned you were on the phone with the Secretary of State. The changes that they made in North Carolina because of all of this are the following. Give me the high level here.
High level absentee ballot changes you can request at any county. Any county can help out and send those things out. Assistance teams for those workers who can be out there, they're going to be assisting rebuilding all these county offices and making sure that voter registration happens, voter roll curing happens, all that kind of stuff. And modified early voting hours. Again, early voting in person starts. You usually go to a building like a county office. To the extent that they're available, they're going to allow pretty much anyone to come in. But if a county office is bad, then they're going to team up and they're going to let one county use another county office.
We talk about the federal government response. Can the federal government do anything or not? Because this is a state-run race.
It's a state-run race, and we don't have federal elections. The federal government can provide assistance to make sure the electricity gets on and the water, but it's these county officials. That's their job. It's a state job.
Scott Tranter, Data Science Director at Decision Desk HQ. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right, still to come here on the Hill, we bring you the latest updates. Hurricane Milton and how government officials are responding to this absolute monster of a storm this evening, just about 24 hours away from Florida. Plus, we are also now getting a sense of just how close Russia was potentially to nuclear war. The new reporting, which includes a possible mole inside the Kremlin. Ambassador John Bolton joins us live here on the Hill. We're back in a few. Here to the Hill on NewsNation. Florida is bracing this evening tonight for Hurricane Milton, a Category 5 storm, at least at the moment, as it barrels toward the state's Gulf Coast. Experts predict the storm could double in physical size before it makes landfall, most likely tomorrow evening. Milton has the potential to be the most destructive hurricane on record in over a century in the Tampa, Florida area. As of right now, more than 1 million people along Florida's West Coast counties have been ordered to evacuate their homes. Experts say it is taking an unusual path and growing intensity. The National Hurricane Center is warning up to 15 feet of storm surge in Tampa Bay. Highways are currently jam-packed, in parts at least, with traffic. 1,300 gas stations have already run out of fuel. And it all comes as Florida is still, of course, suffering parts of it on the West Coast from Hurricane Helene's devastation, which killed 19 people and left massive debris less than 2 weeks ago. Also tonight, just in, the FBI has arrested a man from Afghanistan who allegedly was plotting an election day attack targeting large crowds in the United States. The Justice Department here in Washington making that announcement just moments ago. The man in custody in Oklahoma told the DOJ that he and a juvenile expected to die as martyrs. Well, also this evening, it is the book that now has this town talking. Bob Woodward's soon-to-be-released book, as you see there, War. According to CNN, which obtained an advance copy of the book, Woodward writes that the Biden administration knew conclusively about the pending invasion of Ukraine by Russia through high-level intelligence, describing as, quote, an astonishing intelligence coup from the crown jewels of U.S. intelligence, including a human source inside the Kremlin. And the book reports that by September 2022, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, was getting so desperate that the United States grew worried about a major escalation. Quote from the book, the White House believed there was a 50% chance Russia would use a tactical nuclear weapon, a striking assessment that had skyrocketed up from 5% and then 10%. Joining us now is Ambassador John Bolton, former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Appreciate it. I could spend the whole day, the whole show on the excerpts from this book, but let's start here with Russia. Do you believe the Biden administration had it right, that at one point there was a 50% chance that Russia would engage in nuclear war?
Well, of course, it depends on what information they had and how good it really was. But I will say this. I think ever since February of 2022, the White House has been scared of its shadow when it comes to what Russia was doing and what its capabilities were in Ukraine. I don't really think the potential use of a nuclear weapon ever came close to 50-50. I do think there are circumstances where the Kremlin would use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. I don't think those circumstances have yet been approached, and I don't think in the fall of 22 they were approached. So I think it's part of the White House problem is that they're so deterred by the threat of a wider war. They're obsessed by it, whether it's conventional or nuclear, that they overstate the risk. I'm not saying you should minimize the risk, but I think you're trying to be accurate, and when you overstate the risk, you're giving Vladimir Putin a freebie.
There's another fascinating piece from the story, excerpts from the book, in which Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, told his counterpart from Russia, if you do this, meaning engaging in nuclear war, all constraints would be off. And the Russian counterpart responded by saying, I don't take lightly to threats. And here was Lloyd Austin's response. He said, quote, I am the leader of the most powerful military in the history of the world. I don't make threats. Was this handled properly?
Well, it's a great line. He's not the head of the most powerful military in history. The president is, but Secretary of Defense is not a bad place to be from. And I think it's an indication why communications, either direct military to military, mil as they say, or from the civilian heads of defense agencies can play an important role in communications between countries. My experience has been that certainly our top military officers always behave very professionally, and they say it unvarnished, and I think that kind of communication can be helpful. So I give Austin kudos on the substance. I just quarrel about who the commander-in-chief is.
All right. By the way, I should note, we reached out to the Pentagon today about that quote. They didn't confirm it directly, though, of course, they did not deny that the phone call took place. They provided a readout, basically an acknowledgement that the call happened at the time. What about this idea, Ambassador Bolton, that there was a human source inside the Kremlin, which was why the administration was so sure of what was coming? Do you believe it? And what do you think Vladimir Putin is thinking tonight?
Well, I don't want to say too much about it. This was obviously, I was not in the government, so it's not like I'm privy to information, but it would be an extraordinary achievement if it were true. And I think you'd have to look long and hard whether it was through a counterintelligence perspective to try and get a better sense of whether it was real or not. You know, who was this person? Who was he speaking to? When was he speaking? What was the context? Did they have an intent that information get to us that may not be accurate? 1,000 questions about this, and history will have to tell us. I don't think we're going to learn anytime soon.
The Trump campaign responded to this, and here's what their spokesperson said, responded to the book, or at least the article, again, which has excerpts of the book. Bob Woodward, of course, noted famed author. They said, quote, none of these made-up stories by Bob Woodward are true and are the work of a truly demented and deranged man who suffers from a debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome. What do you make of the statement tonight, Mr. Ambassador, from the Trump campaign as it relates to Bob Woodward's reporting and what we know of it?
Well, it's just as juvenile as most statements from the Trump campaign. I will say, if you look back on Woodward's book about Bob Casey and the Iran-Contra affair, he also quotes Casey on his deathbed, which most people believe is a conversation that never happened.
John Bolton, former ambassador, and of course, former national security advisor in the Trump administration. We got to leave it there. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being with us here on the Hill.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. All right, joining me now, full panel. Samantha Dravis, former official in the Trump administration. Back with me, Kelly Meyer, NewsNation Washington correspondent. The national political reporter for The Hill, Julia Manchester. Scott Bolden, NewsNation political contributor. Hello, welcome back. My goodness, as I said to Ambassador Bolton, we could do the whole show on just the few excerpts from this book. What do you make of this idea, Samantha, that maybe there was and it was fascinating to hear from Ambassador Bolton there, we'll never know about the human source up top or how high it may or may not have gotten.
Well, yeah, and I think to the ambassador's point, it is a book based on a lot of anonymous sources. It's hard to know what's true and what's not. What I took away is just I thought the book underscored how dangerous the situation with Russia is and could potentially be, and it underscores some of the concerns that Republicans have raised about whether or not it's in America's best interest to continue sending billions of dollars of money to Ukraine and potentially provoking World War III with a nuclear superpower.
What about the worldview that he took issue of there with the Biden administration?
Who took issue with?
Ambassador Bolton.
Well, I mean, it's semantics, if you will, and when he talks about whether the head of defense is the head of the military, he is the head of the military. He's just not the commander-in-chief. I take exception to what my Republican colleague says. I think it shows that Biden and his administration are deep in tune, especially if it was a live source, and even if it wasn't a live source, that they were clear. And remember, in 2022 and 2023, there were leaks that the Russians were thinking about using nuclear warheads or strategic, in fact, coming from Putin himself. And so this somewhat confirms this. What I don't understand about Woodward's books, all of them, are that people are talking to him about some pretty high-level stuff, and he's never been sued on any of his quotes or any of his books in his...
Well, Trump tried to go after him.
Trump sues everybody. I'm somebody legitimately...
So one of the more fascinating things about this, too, Julia, Kelly, is as it relates to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, who oversaw the cases that, the DOJ, of course, with Hunter Biden. And here's what Biden is quoted as, here's one quote, Biden said he should never have picked Attorney General Merrick Garland during a conversation over his son's legal troubles.
Look, I just think it shows how personal, obviously, the situation was for President Biden, his son being involved, him sort of, taking it out on, officials at the DOJ like Merrick Garland there. Unsurprising, really.
Interesting to note the White House was asked about this today on Air Force One on their way to Wisconsin. They said they weren't going to comment on any of the excerpts from this book. But it is, as you were mentioning, talking about the Russia invasion and the buildup, remember covering that at NewsNation in the White House as they were trying to deter that from happening. And then just going on to the phone call that you mentioned from the Pentagon, that readout at that moment, it said Secretary Austin rejected any pretext for Russian escalation and reaffirmed the value of continued communication amid Russia's unlawful and unjustified war with Ukraine. That was in October 23rd of 2022. So it was interesting to see the dialogue there, at least what the Pentagon is referring us to.
Let me leave you with this quick question. The President of the United States upset with his Attorney General. Am I talking about Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Who am I talking about, Scott?
I don't know who are you talking about, but I can tell you one thing. Biden's not the only president who's uttered those words to an appointment, whether it's DOJ or any other agency he had. I wish I had never hired or appointed that SO, and we'll leave it at that.
Let's look on here on the Hill, another live look. Hurricane Milton, as it barrels towards Tampa Bay, the area. We don't really know where it's going to hit. The cone right now is 175 miles wide. This could go up to Tampa, south to Cape Coral. Who knows? Either way, that is a live look in the Sunshine State as traffic builds as folks evacuate. Mandatory evacuation orders. The mayor in Tampa saying, if you stay, you will die. Our coverage continues. Plus, Vice President Harris asked the question, would you do anything different than President Biden? Remember Afghanistan, inflation, and the border? Her answer and the reaction from the right. The full panel right after the break.
Tonight, exclusively on NewsNation, Michigan. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin and Republican Mike Rogers take the debate stage. Then Chris Cuomo breaks down this key race. Tonight, 7/6 Central on NewsNation. News for all America.
All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. It is the question that gets asked to the vice president when they are trying to ascend to the top spot. What would you do differently? Today, while appearing on The View, Vice President Harris suggested she would change nothing from President Biden's tenure.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Full panel back with me now. Scott, she says nothing can come to mind. There was rampant inflation, which they said was transitory, the Afghanistan withdrawal, which American soldiers died, and the border, 6.3 million encounters along the southwest before they decided to negotiate. And she would change nothing?
Well,
I don't understand how she doesn't have an answer for that.
Well, she does have an answer. She said she can't think of anything that comes to mind. She was part of that decision-making. And remember, the Democrats and the White House have an argument for all four of those issues.
So why didn't she give it? Like, it feels like you need to have a stock answer there. This isn't asking George Bush who's named the leader of Pakistan when he was the governor of Texas. Well, she's the sitting vice president. I don't understand.
It's the View. I mean, if she was sitting down for an interview with 60 Minutes or for NewsNation and you were doing a one-on-one interview with her, I'm sure she would have had a more expansive answer. But they've got a story to tell about the economy as well as the border. You know, the border's been, quote, fixed, if you will. You don't hear about the border other than the negativity from Donald Trump. The economy is coming back. In fact, inflation is almost normal now, and wages are outperforming inflation rates. So they've got a story to tell. Why would I argue that I would do something differently? Why own an alleged failure when I've got a defense to it and I've got a story to tell?
The problem with that is it's like 70% of the country feels we're on the wrong track.
Yeah, but they still don't blame her for being on the wrong track. That's why she's up by 3 points nationally, and that's why she's gaining on the economy and immigration when compared to Donald Trump. Those are facts.
I think you have to look at the crosstabs of those polls that show 70% of voters think that this country is on the wrong track. Independents, in particular, think we're on the wrong track, and they do blame the Biden-Harris policy.
But not Harris. They don't blame Harris.
She's indistinguishable. They're the same administration.
For the Republicans, she's indistinguishable. But for those voters and for those polling and crosstabs, it is different.
The fact is she was directly asked the question, and she chose not to distinguish herself from the policies of the last 3.5 years. Those answers aren't going to be helpful. There was a Wall Street Journal article out today showing that Democrats are panicking because internal polling shows them collapsing in the blue wall states of Wisconsin and Michigan among non-college educated voters. She's going to have to do more to distinguish
that's always
herself.
Been a challenge
that was one media appearance. Then, of course, Kamala Harris on The View, on 60 Minutes, which aired as well. Watch.
How are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes.
How are you going to get this through Congress?
You know, when you talk quietly with a lot of folks in Congress, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Kamala Harris on her economic plan. Here's the thing. She doesn't have an answer for that. And when you look about DDHQ, balance of power, 70% chance Republicans win the Senate, coin flip in the House. The reality is whoever wins is probably going to have at least one branch here in Washington Republican.
Absolutely, and I think there was an opportunity for her there to essentially, talk about that scenario. How would I reach across the aisle and work with Republicans? What is my record of working with Republicans, whether it was in my time in the Senate, for example? She could talk about that. So definitely a missed opportunity there. But overall, I think, I'm glad she did that interview because she needed to be pressed in a more mainstream environment.
Pressed on the border as well.
Pressed very hard. She's been doing a number of these friendly interviews. I get it strategically. That's good to get out her base. I know a lot of campaigns are trying to get their bases to get out, vote early, register to vote. But she needs to be doing more of those interviews.
That's what I was going to say. The interviews she did today were friendly waters. Yeah. The View, Howard Stern, and she pre-taped the late night show, with Stephen Colbert. So all those were friendly waters. She did, I will say, touch on in those interviews, kind of stuck up for President Biden. As you were mentioning, the Biden-Harris administration, she's kind of towing this line of kind of what we've been covering the last several weeks of her campaign on the road. She's trying to distinguish herself and kind of get a little distance, but at the same time, still be grateful and commend Biden. And she even said in the Howard Stern interview, he's still there. He's still doing a good job. He's not done yet, which was notable, especially with what we were talking about.
By the way, speaking of interviews, Melania Trump popped up on The Five just a little while ago.
Well, we could see in the 4 years that he was there, country was in great shape. Country was safe, country was prosperous, and he will bring that back.
She was asked there, Samantha, what Trump would say or what to do about women. The Trump campaign, what they need to do about women. Obviously, there is a massive gap there that Donald Trump has fought for years. That was her response, basically, look back at what happened back then. Does that cut it? Because the issue of abortion is a drag on the Republican Party.
It is, but I think it's important. We haven't heard this much from Melania in the last, 6 or 7 years that Donald Trump has been on the political scene, and it is incredibly important, I think, for voters to hear from the top female surrogate for the Trump campaign, which is, his wife, the First Lady, Melania. And so I think
should she do more of this?
I think she should.
She's got a book right now that she's promoting.
Yeah, I think she should do more of it. I think it's refreshing as I said, we haven't really heard this much from her, and of course, you heard her distinguish her own position on abortion, which I think, will not, be the Republicans on the right won't like that, but it may persuade some independent voters to see that perhaps she's got a different view there.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Still to come on the other side of the break, the big story that's going to dominate here over the next 48 hours or so and potentially for weeks, unfortunately. Hurricane Milton, a Category 5 barreling toward Florida. One of the lawmakers whose district could basically be right in the middle of landfall there joins us live on the other side of the break as Milton makes its way to the Sunshine State.
You want to pick a fight with Mother Nature, she's winning 100% of the time. Say you're in a single-story home, 12 feet is above that house. So if you're in it, basically that's the coffin that you're in.
Welcome back to The Hill on News Nation. That is the city of Tampa's mayor, Jane Castor, as you heard there, with a very stark warning for residents who decide not to evacuate from Hurricane Milton, now a Category 5 storm heading toward Florida, expected to land about midnight tomorrow night. But right now, as you can see, live look there in the Sunshine State as the sun is about to set this evening, people are trying to get out of town. And that is often the story that we see in Florida. They say evacuate. 11 counties along the southwest right now are under mandatory evacuation orders, but then the traffic builds up. And then the question is, where do you go from there? The governor, Ron DeSantis, saying earlier today, now is the time to go.
You should be executing your plan now. If you're going to get out now. You have time today. Time will be running out.
Joining me now is the Congresswoman from the state of Florida, Republican Laurel Lee. Her district is located right outside Tampa, expected to be hit by Milton tomorrow night. Congresswoman, thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Your worry tonight, your biggest worry as you see this monster off the shores, is what?
Well, the biggest worry is that we need all Floridians who are in those evacuation zones to, if they haven't already, to leave now. You heard the governor saying it earlier. Now is the time. And the other thing that's important to remember when it comes to evacuations, it doesn't have to.
Congresswoman Laura Lee.
There are shelters that are available. There are shelters that are available throughout Hillsborough County.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sorry, keep going. We're obviously having a little issue and delay, as you might imagine. This is probably the least of her worries right now, connecting with us. But we have you back. So your major worry tonight, again, if you could.
Is the evacuation of residents and getting them to safety. And the most important thing for residents to know is that even tens of miles can make a huge difference. It doesn't have to be hours and hours away. There are shelters open throughout Hillsborough County. Many of them are pet friendly. And even just getting out of those evacuation zones and away from the coastline can be the difference between life and death.
You know, you're on the show a lot, Congresswoman, and we often talk policy and, you know, right versus left and all that. And I just wonder tonight, sort of the conversations that you're having, not with any of that, with friends and family, about why they need to go and why they need to leave.
Well, and this is a storm that if it stays on its current trajectory and intensity will be catastrophic. And here's the thing, you're right. Often we're talking about politics, but hurricanes don't care about political parties. And right now, tonight in Florida, neither do we.
Congresswoman Laura Lee with us tonight in Southwest Florida. Congresswoman, thank you for being with us here on the Hill. I appreciate it. I hope you stay safe. I hope your family stays safe. The Congresswoman from that Tampa area, which is expected to be hit. Let's keep these pictures up here. So this is always part of the story, right? You have a Category 4, Category 5 storm barreling down on Florida. One of the unique things about this storm is the size of it. It's actually small, relatively speaking, and intense because of it. And one of the things that the forecasters are saying might happen is that it could grow in physical size, though there is a forecast, at least a prediction, that maybe it downgrades from a 5 to a 4, maybe a 4 to a 3 before it hits. Either way, with a Category 3 storm, you are talking about sustained winds of 130 miles per hour. And one of the major stories in Florida this evening, keep in mind, Helene just hit there. All of those homes, those businesses